Hello, Deus Ex Machina here, the man who will turn a hopeless situation into a happy ending. What does Deus Ex Machina mean? God from the machine. In plays, a individual who comes along resolving the sort of problem in the plot, and so on and so forth. So, the whole point of this channel and all of its content is to explain theologically what is the truth, and ultimately to highlight all the problems in the world and my proposed solutions for them. I was happy that my speech on sexuality and much more for adults has gained in excess of 6,000 views with not even a single dislike. The truth content of that speech is nearly 100%, with corrections provided in the description. In terms of any slightly inaccurate numbers, so on and so forth. So, the universe is a machine. It conserves energy, angular momentum, and charge. Evolution and natural selection are continuing to iterate. In my study of quantum mechanics, I have understood its connection with consciousness, and I believe there is a connection with quantum mechanics, consciousness, and mild telepathy. Further, envy is the occupation of the unwise, for everything that you may consider to be enviable is also, in a dark, ironic way, a curse. It has a double-edged sword. And so, something could be enviable, but also a curse. This is the nature of the universe. And so, what is the curse of being famous? Harder to have a private life. The attention from all the consciousness could be overwhelming. This, that, and the other. Anyway, everything that could be envied also comes along with a curse. Anyway, in terms of love and relationships, I want love to come back, because everything has gotten extremely rotten. I'm not jealous of anyone. The reason I'm not jealous of anyone is because I understand that everything that is enviable is also a curse in some way. And so, let's say someone is jealous of me because I am tall. Well, precisely because I am tall, my acceleration and agility in terms of soccer or internationally football is not as good as Lionel Messi. At my height, I can never be as agile or good as Lionel Messi. Zlatan Ibrahimovic is also about my height, and in his prime, he would dribble past players and do tricks with agility, but not quite on the level of Messi. When you're taller, your center of gravity is higher, and so even young Zlatan, at about my height, could dribble well, but not as good as young Messi, obviously. Anyway, and so the universe ends up balancing everything out. And so quickly, in terms of love and relationships, this is how I want to turn a hopeless situation into a happy ending. Um, there are deterministic attributes in male and female humans that are sexy. Um, if a male human looks at a female, um, certain signs will indicate fertility or high estradiol. And so basically, you're going to get the following. The following. When a woman has larger breasts, those larger breasts do not indicate superior milk supply for the offspring or babies. Larger breasts simply indicate higher estradiol and therefore higher fertility. And so a male brain will see larger breasts as evolutionarily attractive. A woman is more fertile, has higher estradiol. Larger backsides are actually correlated or coupled with wider hips. Wider hips indicate a superior space or room for successful pregnancy and childbirth. And so ultimately, larger backsides are attractive due to their coupling with wider hips, indicating ultimately a whole lot of space and room for successful pregnancy and birthing. So there are women that are skinny and flat like a board in terms of backside. And then there are women that are, protrude out from in terms of their backside more significantly. All right. And so you'll notice that often the women that are skinnier, with nothing on the bottom, their hips will be narrower, whereas the women that have larger backsides, their hips are wider. Okay. So anyway, and so the hourglass figure is actually ultimately larger breasts indicate high estradiol and fertility. A larger backside correlates with wider hips, correlates with larger space for successful pregnancy and birthing. And so it's ultimately, those visual cues are simply signs of high fertility. And so some people who aren't the most dedicated may think larger breasts mean more milk for the babies, and that's why they're sexy. But the breast size isn't really correlatory with milk availability. It just indicates whether the woman has high estradiol or not. Estradiol is a fertility hormone, ultimately. So on and so forth. And so for whatever reason, there are different types of male brains. My male brain is conditioned to prefer backside over breasts. And so I have sexually been with a female who has not the largest breasts, kind of flat on top, but quite large on the bottom. 5'9" maybe. Anyway, and I was recently on Tinder, and I matched with this African American woman who was like, had an even larger backside than this sort of Caucasian, largely white woman who still was very big on the bottom. And so it was funny because ultimately, although I'm preferential to backside, the backsides do not have to be nuttily large. And so this white woman's backside that I was with was very large, But then this profile on Tinder that I saw that was funny that I matched with was an African American woman, and in this case her backside was nuttily large. Anyway, so anyway, but yeah, and so, solely objectifying visual things are ultimately a bit silly, and so relationships are ultimately end up getting strengthened by intellectual and emotional compatibility, as opposed to raw physicality. But anyway, and so in terms of the male structure, a female may like, taller, more muscular males, and that's going back in evolutionary time, in which height and muscles indicated evolutionary strength back in the time when the males used to have to hunt for food. And so and so basically, okay, there's the two Chris's from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Chris Evans and Chris Hemsworth. They're both taller and have like a muscular structure, right? And so that kind of structure is evolutionarily attractive for the females. And that's, again, going back to when height and muscularity used to be evolutionarily necessary for hunting, for survival. But now everything is just kind of a bit intellectual. And so there's a whole lot of not necessarily tall, not necessarily muscular men who have, above average IQs or high IQs that are doing technical work in engineering or on computers, that are making a good salary or making a lot of money. And then they have wives. And so earning money, doing something useful in the economy, is the modern day equivalent of, in the old days, doing physical work and hunting for food. And so height and muscles in the old times, indicating evolutionary strength, is in the present times replaced by your brain, your intellectual strength, because so on and so forth. Anyway, and then of course the other thing, other than the sort of outward appearance of size, in terms of height and muscularity, the other thing in terms of physical things a female could select for is penis size, and so on. And so, in all the studies I've seen, male penis size is not actually correlated with height, and so the correlation with male penis size and height is extremely weak or non-existent, and so on and so forth. And so you're like, okay, are taller men larger? And then the answer is that most studies have found that the correlation between male height and penis size is extremely weak, or actually pretty much non-existent. But an extremely weak correlation could be that, there's a small, very, very, very minimal correlation with height and penis size. But anyway. Um, anyway. But for the most part, not really that correlated. Anyway. And so female may select for penis size because of the following. The female vagina is structured in the following fashion. Usually, for, let's say, a Western woman, when unaroused, the vagina is going to be 4 inches deep. Upon arousal, the vagina elongates or deepens to accommodate sex, and maximally will expand to about 8 inches deep. And so just like how male penis size can vary, female vagina size can also vary. And so if a woman is taller, she could have larger sexual apparatus, larger vagina, and be like slightly deeper. But even for the females that are taller than average, their vaginas realistically don't expand to more than about 8 inches deep in terms of where the cervix is. And so, let's say if a male's size is less than 8 inches when erect, it can stimulate the cervix. Sorry, correction. If a male's size is less than 8 inches when erect, it can stimulate the clitoris, which is shallow inside the vagina and near the front of the body. But it won't stimulate the cervix. If there's 8 inches or more of insertable length, it will hit the cervix and be able to stimulate cervical areas. And so orgasm is caused not just by shallow clitoral stimulation, but also deeper cervical stimulation. And then usually, as per proportions, increased length at peak erect size is also correlated with increased thickness, and pressure against the vaginal walls can tend to also cause orgasm. And so, basically, smaller size is going to pleasure the clitoris, which is pretty shallow inside the vagina. Larger size is going to stimulate the cervix and also be correlated with increased thickness, which means more pressure against the vaginal walls. And so, ultimately, larger size is such that in a single session of intercourse, a woman may have more orgasms with higher frequency than average size. And so, average size is doing clitoral stimulation, larger size is doing clitoral plus cervical stimulation, and also the increased length is correlated with increased thickness. So then there's plus more pressure against the vaginal walls. And so increased size, multiple orgasms, average size, fewer orgasms tends to be the case. So on and so forth. And so one of the things that female could select for is size, right? But any relationship, whether it's a man selecting for physical sexual attributes in a woman, or a woman selecting for physical sexual attributes in a male, a relationship that is based on pure physicality will not last very long, because the profundity must actually be intellectual and emotional, meta or above sex for it to last. Anyway, So, um, so yeah. Anyway, um, anyway, um, so cool. Um, so, um, the stereotype is that males who have African origin genetics are more endowed on average, and so this is true, and it's because they evolved in a hotter equatorial Africa, in which the homeostasis was such that blood flow went to the surface of the skin and extremities. During puberty, blood flow to the genitalia carries nutrients that build out the structure of the male penis. And so, ultimately, evolving humans in hotter conditions in Africa, with increased blood flow over generations during puberty and so on and so forth, is such that you get the emergent trait of larger on average size than the Caucasian people who evolved in the temperate regions. So anyway, um, so anyway, um, so um, anyway, um, so anyway, and so for that reason, the real way to measure a male penis in an unexaggerated fashion is the bone pressed erect length, pressing to the bone from the top, going to the end. And so there are grower humans and then shower humans. So the grower humans will grow significantly from their flaccid, and the shower humans will not grow significantly from their flaccid. And so the bone pressed erect length measurements for different countries have different averages. And so the average bone pressed erect in the US is 5.6. This is fully erect. And then the average bone pressed erect in Sudan, Africa is actually the highest in the world, in which that bone pressed erect length is actually 7.1, right? On average. Okay? So, anyway. And so, um, so, um, so, all this is true and stuff. And so while the men of African origin genetics will be larger on average than the whites, the actual world record holder for male size is ironically a white or Caucasian British male going by the name of Matt Barr, who is much larger than any black or African American pornographic actor. And so the blacks are typically larger than the whites, but then there are white anomalies that could be as large or larger than the blacks. And an example of that is the world record holder Matt Barr, who is fully white or Caucasian British, and Matt Barr is bigger than pretty much any black porn star that has ever been popular, because he's like the medically verified world record holder. Anyway, so yeah, as to what I said earlier about I'm not jealous of anyone because everything is just a double-edged sword that also has a curse attribute to it. Frankly, if Matt Barr's dimensions are unexaggerated. He's like 10 inches completely flaccid, and then 14.5 inches bone pressed erect, with 8.5 inches girth circumference, right? And so for the majority of female vaginas, that's going to be a bit too big, realistically. So there's, female vagina size is going to vary based on different factors: female height, female size, female race. The Chinese woman, there was a study done, and they have smaller vaginas than the Western woman, which makes them a good evolutionary fit for the Chinese men, who have smaller on average bone pressed erect length than the Western men, and so on. So I want love to come back. I like to see the beautiful Asian couples. Anyway. And so anyway. And so there's a story with Matt Barr where he's in the shower, and basically because he's like 10 flaccid, 14.5 erect, his flaccid size obstructs the view of his feet in the shower. Then he slips on something and falls, and then has 2 shoulder fractures. So he's walking around in a sling, and all that happened because of his size. That's apparently the story with him. Anyway. So anyway, for reference, if Matt Barr is actually 14.5 by 8.5, for reference, the break or Julio was capped at 9.5 to 9.75, with maybe, when unpumped, 6.75 girth, right? And that was the break or Julio, right? So Matt Barr would be nuttily big, like bigger than Julio, bigger than break. And so break was already quite big, with sufficient length, and maybe 6.75 girth unpumped. You up it to Matt Barr, 8.5 girth, 14.5 BPEL unexaggerated, which is ridiculous. And so male porn stars tend to pump, and so Julio's girth estimate unpumped was maybe 6.75 around. Pumped, he could be more, so on and so forth. Anyway. So cool. And so anyway, a good way to get true information regarding male pornographic actor size, because the porn industry exaggerates the size of the male actors from their true BPEL, is asking an AI assistant such as Grok to read the entire internet and determine the Reddit frame analysis community consensus of the unexaggerated peak BPEL of porn stars. And so Anton Harden is exaggerated to 11 inches usually. But Grok will say that the community frame analysis consensus is that his true bone pressed erect length peak from the top is realistically more like 8.5. But because Anton is relatively slim and only about 5'7", right, he's quite short. From certain camera angles, an 8.5 bone pressed on his height with his very short legs, could look like 11 inches. In other words, he's so short that 8.5 from a certain camera angle can look like it's hanging nearly to his knee, and therefore look like 11. But he's just 5'7", and so 8.5 BPL looks like 11. Then the porn industry is going to exaggerate him to 11. For reference, I am 6'4" with much longer legs. And I have also, in my self-measurement, seen that I reach a peak bone pressed erect length of at least 8.5, but I'm just way taller with longer legs. So anyway, and so in my own self-measurement, unexaggerated, my peak bone pressed erect length from the top hits at least 8.5. Could at times be nearing 9, and so on. But anyway, and so for Anton, Grok will say the community consensus from the frame analysis community is that his BPL is about 8.5 peak. But then for Julio or Break, it'll say the community consensus is about 9.5 to 9.75 peak. And so Julio was, on many of his profiles, stated to be 6 feet tall. But people have said that that height seems a bit exaggerated because Julio doesn't seem that much taller than his female co-stars. And so realistically, Julio barefoot might be more like 5'10". Anyway, Julio is taller than Anton, and maybe an inch more than Anton. So Anton is like 8.5 and 5'7". Julio is maybe 5'10", and then 9.5. But the thing that people have noticed about Julio is that he has an odd deformation where his dick attaches to his body that people have thought is some kind of pelvic detachment, where he has like an over 1 inch apparent scarring indicating a level of pelvic detachment. And so people have thought that this was intentional sort of suspensory ligament release surgery, or that because of his sickle cell anemia, him having episodes of priapism could have led to a compromised suspensory ligament, leading to a naturally occurring pelvic detachment. And so Julio hitting a peak of visually a 9.5 or 9.75 BPEL tends to include that over 1 inch pelvic detachment. And during insertion or practical sex, that detachment may tend to compress and not necessarily affect his insertable or usable length. Anyway. And so note that Anton Hardin, as Grok will say, the community consensus is that his peak BPEL is 8.5, and 8.5 on a 5'7" guy who's skinny can get exaggerated to 11. And so much of Anton Hardin's promotional material will state Anton Hardin 11-inch cocker or something, right? And so, because everything is exaggerating, in the past, I've I've actually exaggerated myself to 10 inches, but realistically my unexaggerated peak bone press direct length from the top, as I've measured, hits at least 8.5. And so Anton at 8.5, his exaggerated material pushes him to 11, and myself at also at least 8.5. I said I was 10, but the point is that because everything is exaggerating, and so if you're an 8.5 BPEL from the top, the porn industry will exaggerate you to at least 11 inches. And then if you're so on and so forth. Anyway, so cool. Anyway, and so Julio at 9.5 or something or more, the porn industry would exaggerate him to 14. So anyway, and so I'm a grower human who's 6'4" barefoot, mixed, both black and white. Flaccid when warm, I will usually hang to 5.5 inches. Flaccid when freezing, homeostasis could shrink the flaccid to 4 inches. Erect and warm and healthy, my peak unexaggerated bone press direct length will touch at least 8.5. And so on. Then in terms of girth, I am over 6 inches around. In terms of shaft, perhaps a bit wider than I am tall in terms of girth, and then about 7 inches around at my header glands. Anyway, so I'm saying at least 8.5 bone press to be safe, but at times I could near 9. Anyway, so so cool. Anyway, so anyway, so cool. Yeah. So, anyway, yeah. Anyway, so, yeah. I can read minds, and so I know that there's a bunch of brains that want to call me a liar or invalidate my conscious experience, but I don't care. I'm just going to keep on talking. So multiple conditions need to be optimal for a male to be maximally sexually performant. The male cannot be too sleepy or tired. He must be hydrated. It cannot be too cold, leading to shrinkage. Preferably the male should have high energy levels. Preferably the male should have strong legs and core and cardiovascular health to ensure that his peak size can be maintained invariant of sitting down or standing up or exerting himself. preferably his arousal level should be high. He should be aroused by the partner. And then also preferably he should not be overly sensitive, such that he can last at his peak size without having premature ejaculation. There are pills called Hims Last Longer that could help with premature ejaculation. But also generally, as a male is having frequent sex or starts having more sex, they will understand sensitivity and ejaculation control to a higher extent. And so the male pornographic actors, they can last for an extremely long time at their peak size with no premature ejaculation. So anyway, so on and so forth. Anyway, and so ultimately, in a few early experiences in my life and intercourse, I wasn't always at my peak. My arousal level would fluctuate, and then potentially as well, exertion, leg exertion, core exertion, cardiovascular exertion could have at times led to a little reduction from my peak, because it's all about blood flow. And so let's say you are standing up and trying to become aroused, and it is harder to reach your peak. But then as soon as you sit down, it is easier to engorge to your peak. The answer for why that's happening is that the cardiovascular blood flow and muscular demand of leg muscles and core muscles to support yourself standing could take away from blood flow, leading to engorgement of the dick to its true peak size. So you sit down, you remove the exertion and muscular demand of legs and core, and then potentially you can engorge to your peak size more easily. However, this is not like a permanent issue. This issue can be solved via improving cardiovascular and muscular strength, such as squats and deadlifts for legs, core exercises for core, and also things like soccer or jogging for cardiovascular health. And so a male human is supposed to do cardio 3 times a week for at least 45 minutes each session. And so once the cardio is strong, legs are strong, core is strong, it doesn't matter sitting down, standing up, you can be at your peak size. Anyway, and so at my size, which is at least 8.5 bone pressed at peak, the second time I had intercourse in my life, a woman was 11 years older than me, sexually experienced. She said that her orgasm count was 4. And then, which is, I guess, pretty good. It was only my second time having sex. Anyway. Anyway. And so then I sort of figured out how to maintain my peak size. And I got very fit. And so then I did a standing photo shoot where I was standing up at my peak size. And so again, I'm 6'4", whereas Julio is going to be maybe 5'10" barefoot. And so a real standing picture of me at roughly my full size in which I'm 6'4" tall and at least 8.5 bone pressed. Again, when you're as tall as 6'4", being at least 8.5 bone pressed protruding from your body will not look necessarily super long given your height. But I got a real image of Julio kneeling, performing insertion, fully erect. And so I scaled it. I made the size of Julio's head and my head the same. From back of neck to nose, I made the same. Width of our thighs, I made the same. And so I'm coming in as slightly taller with a more elongated torso. And so ultimately, when he performs insertion, any pelvic detachment tends to compress. And so in terms of length from press point or attachment to body to head or glands, our lengths are coming up as roughly the same. But Julio's sickle cell anemia led to episodes of priapism, causing swollen tissue, making him one of the thickest. And so in terms of girth of shaft, he is slightly thicker than myself, visually. And so he may be up to 6.75 around, whereas I am, over 6 around, maybe 6.1. And so that's the girth differential there. If you plot circles on Desmos, 6.1 circumference, 6.75 circumference, that's about the shaft girth difference between Break and myself. But funnily, Break would have a quite thick shaft and then smaller glands or head than shaft. Then I have like moderate girth shaft, but then larger glands or head than shaft. So around head, I'm maybe 7 inches around. And so it's a very, very, very interesting picture, and it's scaled roughly correctly. I'm taller, I have a longer torso. I made the size of our heads, back and neck to nose, the same. Width of our thighs, the same. It's roughly to scale. This is how it would look if him and I were in the same room. Again, the lengths are about the same. In shaft girth, I'm a little bit thinner. In girth around my head or glands, I'm bigger. And again, during insertion, any pelvic detachment he has tends to compress. So anyway, so I'm less than Break. I'm not some delusional guy who thinks he's equivalent to Break. I'm obviously slightly less than Break, but in that real scaled picture, it looks comparable. Not noticeably less, just slightly less. Anyway. Anyway, and so as per the story, because fate loves irony, right? I have a decent first few experiences in sex. I'm not always at peak. My arousal levels fluctuating. Maybe at times exertion is leading to slight reduction from my true size. So then I figure out that I need to improve leg strength, core strength, cardio to maintain peak size invariant of standing up, sitting down, exerting myself or not. I do a standing photo shoot. Standing picture scaled with Break himself. I look to be only slightly less than Break. Then, as per irony, what the universe does to me is that I catch an airborne flu-like virus that comes along with a very high fever. And so then what happens is that the high fever that my body is fighting kills my sperm count and my body's hydration level. And so the human body and your dick is mainly water. And so when I was sick with this virus and high fever, my flaccid, instead of being typically 5.5, my flaccid was more constricted. It was also over Christmas, and so it was colder. And so when I had this high fever and virus, and it was also, somewhat colder, over Christmas. My flaccid, instead of 5.5, was like less than 5 and more constricted because my body's fighting a fever and is dehydrated and is also cold over Christmas. And so basically, um, um, what happened is that a female I wanted to see was on a relatively tight schedule, and then so was I in terms of, when I could be in the area. And so ultimately what happened is that I agreed to see her when I was still sick. And so my body is fighting this high fever, and a high fever kills male sperm count and hydration level. All right, your body and your dick is mainly water, right? And then the virus in my system is such that I'm low energy, weak, and have low libido, right? And so ultimately, in agreeing to see this woman when I'm a sick, dead battery, I have intercourse. And instead of being the me that I was when I took that standing picture, in which I look only slightly less than break, I was a dead battery with horrible erectile dysfunction, extremely weak, and I was, like, in large part less than 6 inches during a good amount of that sex, because my body was fighting this high fever and a virus. And so the reason I'm a nihilist, or tend to lean towards nihilism or nihilism, is because everyone is silly and jealous. And so many men would be happy that my size was reduced in that time, but I just don't care. And so basically, in health, before I got sick, potent standing picture looks comparable to break. Then get sick, body fights high fever. High fever makes me dehydrated and kills my sperm count. The virus in general kills my energy levels and libido. And so then I'm just a dead battery. And during that sex, I'm a dead battery. And I'm low energy and weak. And I'm like 6 inches or less because I'm having sex when sick. And so the universe just propagates irony. And so I still have this real picture taken when healthy and potent, in which I visually look to be comparable to even break, but only really slightly less, roughly to scale, given that I'm taller. So anyway, but I think love needs to come back. In the Christian tradition, you say the following: you are committing to your partner in sickness and in health. And so basically, in sickness, I could have horrible weakness and erectile dysfunction. In health, I'll be only slightly less than break. So anyway, anyway, so cool. Anyway, um, anyway, so cool. Anyway, I was once talking to this stripper, and she said the following, which is that basically, she said, I was once with a guy who was 7 feet tall and 11 inches, right? And so I don't know if that was his unexaggerated bone pressed erect length, where his unexaggerated bone pressed erect length was actually 11 inches, because that would be, way bigger than Anton, who is 5'7", and like 8.5, and bigger than Julio, who was maybe 5'10", and like 9.5, right? With a pelvic detachment. But, there could exist 7-foot tall, 11-inch bone press guys. And so this stripper is saying, I was once with a guy who was 7 feet tall and 11 inches bone pressed, erect. Or she didn't say that specifically. She said, I was once with a guy who was 7 feet tall and 11 inches. I don't know if that's his unexaggerated bone press direct length measurement, because everything tends to get exaggerated. As I said, Anton Hardin's promotional material exaggerates him to 11 inches, but the frame analysis community puts him really at a peak bone press of like 8.5, that on his 5'7" body could look very large because he has short legs, right? And so maybe this 7-foot guy actually was 11 inches bone pressed, which would be bigger than Anton Hardin, who is 5'7". But anyway, she said, I was once with a 7-foot guy that was 11 inches. But my current boyfriend is just about average. And so if what she meant by average was like 5.6 inches bone pressed, because that's the US average, then that would mean that basically she went from a 7-inch guy who was 11 bone pressed to average, which is like 5.6 or like 6 bone pressed, which means in length roughly half or whatever. She's like, oh, I was once with a 7-foot tall 11-inch guy, but now my boyfriend is just average. And she was saying it doesn't matter that much, and that ultimately there's a lot of more important things than size, and that basically you shouldn't think that the size is just going to do it for you, and whatever. And so if she can go from that to then average and be happy with her current boyfriend who is average, and say that really it doesn't matter that much, and that really, you shouldn't think that your size alone is doing it for you, or whatever. I found that to be pretty profound, because I think love should come back, and so even average size is going to make a woman orgasm from relatively shallow clitoral stimulation, and so on and so forth. So anyway, so anyway, so anyway, so anyway, so yeah, anyway, so yeah, anyway, so anyway, so anyway, yeah, so throughout the course of my life, what are the causes of any instances in which I was less than my true peak during intercourse? Fluctuating arousal level, exertion, in other words, leg, core, cardiovascular exertion, leading to slight reduction from my true peak size. Or 3, illness, a high fever and a virus, causing extreme weakness and erectile dysfunction. And so funnily enough, again, I worked on my legs, my core, and my cardio, did a standing photo shoot in which I'm at my peak size and I'm looking comparable to break, then got very ill with a horrible high fever and virus, and had intercourse when still heavily ill, with therefore now, instead of cardiovascular or muscular strength influenced erectile dysfunction or reduction, the reduction or weakness was instead due to high fever and virus that my body was fighting. So anyway, so on and so forth. Anyway, I cannot share the picture where I'm looking comparable to Julio on YouTube, obviously, but it's a real picture. Anyway, and so I think people should find evolutionarily who they're meant for. Some guys are going to be too big, too small, or just right. The Asian woman, the Chinese woman, there's a real study done, and they are smaller on average than the Western woman in terms of vagina size. The Asian men, the Chinese men, are smaller on average in terms of bone pressed erect length than the Western men. So evolutionarily, the beautiful Asian couples, they're evolutionarily a match for each other. I like to see the beautiful Asian couples. I don't like to see a porn scene with Julio and some Chinese or Japanese woman, where the Japanese woman is doing that, Chinese woman is doing that to make money. Anyway, so on and so forth. So yeah. Anyway. Yeah. So anyway. Anyway. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. Anyway. I know infinite brains are going to try and say I'm wrong or something, or invalidate my conscious experience. I don't care anymore. I'm just pure. So, but yeah. And so I figured out how to maintain arousal level, have strong legs and core and cardio, and be at my peak sitting down, standing up, exertion or not. And I figured out how to be sexually performant. Then I got sick, and so I became weak with ED. And then the other thing now I need to figure out is sensitivity control and no premature ejaculation. So a bunch of, experienced porn stars, they can last for a while at their peak with no sensitivity related premature ejaculation. And so I did research. It seems like if a male is having more frequent sex or is more sexually experienced, they have better sort of ejaculation control and sensitivity. Whereas, and then there are also, again, Hims last longer pills. I don't know about the side effects of those though. So on and so forth. But anyway, yeah. So anyway, for reference, even when I was sick with horrible erectile dysfunction, the female involved still got very loud and seemed like she was enjoying it. And basically stated that initially she said, well, she had only one orgasm, but then she actually quickly corrected herself and said, oh, it was actually maybe 2 orgasms, right? And so basically, just a quick thing with her, right? With me being unimpressive, sick, erectile dysfunction me, she still reached orgasm once or twice, in just in that quick time, with me being like on impressive erectile dysfunction 6 size, right? Anyway, previous times, first time with her, she said it was 4 orgasms. Then another time, she wasn't on her period or losing her virginity and she started bleeding. She said with her it may be typical for her to bleed with men that are larger and more endowed. And so she starts bleeding. And she said her vagina gets deeper as it gets tighter. So she said it was some kind of tear, something I caused. Because my peak size, unexaggerated, is at least 8.5 bone pressed from the top. 8.5. And then over 6 inches shaft girth, slightly wider shaft than tall, and then maybe 7 inches girth at head or glans. And so a female vagina, again, doesn't expand to more than like 8 inches deep, even for women that are slightly taller than average. And so why then there is blood and a tear and bleeding is because of my maximum length and especially girth around my head or glans, cause some kind of tear. And that all makes sense. Anyway. So anyway. Um, so yeah. And so if you think I am some idiot because I said I was 10 inches when my bone pressed erect length peak is, in all honesty, at least really 8.5, note that the community consensus for Anton Harden, who is 5'7", is also that his peak is about 8.5, but on his very short body, and he's short and skinny, right? The porn industry exaggerates Anton Harden in his promotional material to 11 inches. It's going to say Anton Harden, 11-inch cock. But he's really just 5'7" and like a 8.5 BPEL, which looks quite large because he's 5'7" and skinny with skinny legs, and so on and so forth. But anyway, so on and so forth. But anyway, so long story short, there's a real picture where I look comparable to Break. And I think people should find evolutionarily who they're meant for, and so on and so forth. Anyway, so yeah. Yeah. What? Yeah. Deus Ex Machina out.